Hey guys, welcome back. Coach Logan here. I'm actually going to take a break from my Caro-Kann series and focus on another really interesting topic, which is how to use a bishop pair. A lot of kids have heard about, how the bishop pair is supposedly an advantage, but unless you know how to use it, you might not actually feel like that. So take a look at this position that I have up on the board. It's black to move. Take a moment to think about it and decide, try to evaluate it. Meaning, say you think either white's better by a lot, black's better by a lot, maybe white's better by a little, black by a little, maybe it's dead even. Try to evaluate it and give me some reasoning. Okay, so you can pause the video if you want more time, but when I first show this to kids, the first thing they usually notice is they notice that black could play a move like bishop takes b2. But then what they'll discover is that after rook to b1, you're just going to have to move this bishop, and then say something like rook takes on b7. Really, all you've managed to do is trade b pawns and just activate white's rook, which is probably helping white more than it's helping black. So we can eliminate that. And then we need a more general evaluation of the position. And what most kids tell me is this looks about even, right? Like, let's see, we have even material. Pawns are roughly symmetrical. Nobody has any real serious pawn weaknesses. Queens are off the board. Nobody's king is in any danger. They both look pretty safe. Looks just about even. But as you can probably guess from the topic of the video, is that black has two bishops, a bishop pair. White has a bishop and a knight. And the bishop pair actually has a lot of potential to be an advantage. And this is a game from Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion. And he's going to demonstrate just how much of an advantage these bishops can be. And the reason these are so advantageous in a position like this, the primary reasons, there's two primary reasons. One is that there are pawns on both sides of the board. So if you look both at the king side and at the queen side, there are pawn islands, which means the bishops can demonstrate one of their main strengths, which is they can attack and possibly defend on both sides of the board at the same time. A knight cannot do that. The other reason the bishops play well here is that the center is wide open, so the bishops can move around very easily. So let's see how Steinitz plays here. First thing he does is he activates his pieces. So he plays rook a to d8. White now plays pawn to c3, just so that he can stop worrying about bishop takes b2 at any moment. Rook to e8, further activating. White plays knight to b3, and now this is the first point. Steinitz plays a beautiful strategic move here. Pawn to b6. The point behind this move is it's doing two things. The first thing it's doing is it's restricting white's knight. This knight can no longer go to c5 nor a5, which might bother your pawns. So we're restricting their knight, which is one of the major advantages of having the two bishops versus the bishop and the knight, is that a knight is generally easier to restrict, either with your pawns or with your bishop or with both. The knight can sort of be caged more easily. The second, more subtle point with putting the pawns on dark squares is that these two bishops are actually not necessarily of equal value. What I mean by that is the more valuable bishop is your unopposed one. This light square bishop does not have a white counterpart. This dark square bishop does. White has a dark square bishop as well, which in the long run means that it's more likely these bishops will be traded. That will leave this as the remaining bishop, and when this bishop is the sole remaining bishop, you will want it to harmonize with your pawns, meaning you're going to want your pawns on the opposite color, which is a good reason to start putting pawns on dark squares. It's a very subtle point, but Steinitz was, I guess, the first world champion, is one of the first people to really be aware of this. Later was Capablanca was the one who popularized the rule, but it's a very important point. Okay, so we get h3 attacking the bishop just retreats. White plays rook to d1, bringing a rook to an open file. Black now plays pawn to c5, further restricting this knight, taking away d4. White plays bishop to g5, attacking the rook, trying to get us to give him the file, but black does not do that, playing pawn to f6. Again, notice that's another pawn on a dark square. King to f7, activating the king. f3, pawn to g5, another pawn on a dark square. Get a rook trade. Bishop moves, and guess what his next move is? Got it. All of his pawns now on dark squares. This was in like the last 4 or 5 moves. Black has managed to put now all of his pawns on the opposite color of his unopposed bishop. Get rook e1, and now, given that I just said that, of course, on the very next move, black plays f5, which takes a pawn off of a dark square, but it reopens this bishop, which is, it's worth it to do that. f4. So white is now trying to maybe fix the pawn structure, meaning, make it so that it's more stable and not moving around as much. He can stop worrying about different pawn thrusts from black. Black is very happy to just keep everything tense. So he just plays a move like bishop f6, with the point being that bishops are very good at reacting quickly, so black is fine leaving a lot of tension here. At any moment, maybe we'll push this pawn, maybe we'll trade. It's just going to leave more stuff for white to have to tend to. White plays g3 to support this pawn, and now we reach another key point, which is when you're playing with the bishops, you really, really want to play on both sides of the board. So black has sort of made some progress on the king side. He's moved his pawns up, activated his king, has some space here. But what he wants to do now is create pressure on white's queen side. So how do you think he can do that? I'm going to give you a moment to pause your videos and think about this. How can black create pressure on white's queen side? Okay, pause your videos if you want more time. Black plays the move pawn to a5 here, which is an excellent move. He has with him the immediate threat of just playing a4 and kicking out the knight, and then a3 hitting this pawn mass. So just to show you, if white were to fall asleep at the wheel here and play something like king f2, we're just going to go a4, kick this knight back, and now say something like pawn to a3. Well, we're threatening to take, and this pawn is just going to be devastating on the 7th rank. So white is going to recapture us instead, but now we just take another pawn. We take this pawn on c3, and we've technically just traded pawns, but we really, really just butchered white's pawn structure on the queen side here. These are doubled and isolated. At some point, this rook might slide over and start taking these. Our bishops are just roaring on these diagonals. This is just much better for black, completely winning. So after a5, white preemptively plays knight to c1. We continue with a4, and now he plays a3 to stop the pawn stop the black pawn from getting there. Okay, now if you remember again, one of the techniques using the bishop pair is to try to restrict your opponent's knight. Can you come up with a way to do that? I'll give you a moment to pause the videos. Okay, Steinitz played the move here, bishop to c4, which is a beautiful and common technique in these types of positions. When they have a knight on the side of the board, we have a saying, a knight on the rim is dim. This bishop that's 1, 2, 3 squares away can just totally restrict the knight. Now, any which way the knight wants to move, whether it's e2, d3, b3, or a2, this bishop will have a chance to take it or trade it off. Doesn't mean like the knight can't reactivate, but this bishop will now have a say. It's sort of like prison guard for this knight. White plays king f2. And what black would really like to do now is activate this rook further. He wants to drop this rook into d2, check the king, start taking pawns, but the problem is white has a bishop defending. So now black is going to take this pawn. White has to recapture with the bishop. If they recapture with the pawn, it falls into a tactic. I'll give you 3 seconds to solve it. Yep, bishop to h4 check. It is just picking up the rook. White's king is skewered. He'll have to move away, and you just take the rook. So after g takes f4, bishop has to take on f4, and now black plays bishop g5, trying to trade this bishop, which was our less valuable one than our unopposed bishop, and trying to remove white's defender. We get bishop takes g5 from white. Black takes back, and now white has to prevent the move rook to d2, so he plays king e3, and black continues with king f6, just patiently further improving his king. Probably could play rook e8 check here. I don't think it's a bad move. I think it's still winning, but black is very patient in a better position, which is what you should do, especially in the endgame. You should be patient. King f6. h4 from white. And we see stuff like this very commonly. When one side is just squeezing the other, not necessarily making immediate threats, but just taking away, good squares from your opponent's pieces and making it difficult to come up with a plan. A lot of times they'll just make a desperate pawn thrust, trying to create some activity, but those more often than not just weaken the position, and this is no exception. Pawn to h4. G takes h4, G takes. White's pawn is now isolated here, and black's king now has a route to get into the game, which is through some squares like e5 and f4, which are a little bit harder to do when white still had a pawn on g3. So black here plays rook to e8 check, which white has to go back and defend this. He can't run to f4 with his king because you'll just take his rook, so he has to play king f2. Steinitz trades rooks and then activates his king. Now, black's king is pretty clearly going to go king f4 and then maybe just go king g4 and take this pawn. So white desperately tries to get his knight back into it. And now Steinitz has a very important choice to make. Should he take this knight? If we take this knight, we eliminate it. But then we're in a king and pawn endgame where there's, the result is either going to be we win, we lose, or we draw, and it's totally defined. There's no ambiguity there. If you keep the bishop, you have more chances, to save, things if it go wrong. So the question is, should you take the knight? And this time, especially if you're one of the more advanced viewers watching this, I would really pause the video and try to calculate it out till you can be sure. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to continue. So pause if you want more time. Steinitz calculated it out. Bishop takes e2 is winning. After king takes e2, he plays king f4, and the point now is white just does not have a good way to deal with black's threats. First of all, black, threatening to play king g4 and take this pawn. So, for instance, let's say white plays king f2. Then black will play king g4, and now if white plays king e3, Black will not take this pawn. If he plays king takes h4 check, white will actually be the one who's winning, because after king f4 and our king is stranded on the side here, white will take this pawn, and then his king will be quite close to our pawns over here. So that's not really what we want. Instead of king e3, now just the pawn runs through. f4 check. I shouldn't say the pawn runs through. White can stop it, but now you can safely take this. King takes h4. If king f3, king can come back, and now you're actually defending this pawn, and you are staying up a pawn, and that should be winning. Similarly, after king f4, if white were to try h5, running his pawn, you're in time to take it and then defend this f5 pawn. So to show you that, white can attack, but you're in time to defend this. So in the game, I think actually after king f4, white played the move pawn to c4. And again, Steinitz had to think a bit, but it is winning after the move king to g4. He's threatening to take this. And now after king e3, once again, it's important to be precise here. You do not just want to go grabbing this pawn, because then white will get his king to win back the c pawn, and his king will be better placed to go after your queen side. Instead, much better is to just play, after king e3, is to just play pawn to f4 check. And it just turns out that black is too fast. After f3, king to e3, trying to stop you from promoting. Ooh, black is too fast. King g3, h5, push the pawn again. King tries to stop you one more time, but once again, you are promoting quicker. After like h6, you promote with check. King will have to move, and you can probably win this just now, but if you really want to be safe, just come back and stop this pawn. Okay, so I'm going to scroll back to the beginning, but I think this was an excellent demonstration of the long-term, strategic advantage that you can have when you have a bishop pair, and the board has opened up, and there's possibility to play on both sides. That's when you can really kind of flex the muscles that you have with a bishop pair. Okay, so this is Coach Logan signing out. Until next time.